It's a great pleasure to welcome Sally Ann this evening. She's well known in the Ashbury and Lambourn area. Many of us follow her posts on Facebook and are aware of her work not only as a farmer and founder of the Berrycroft Hub, but also as an ecologist. She's co-founder of the Dung Beetle UK mapping project, delightfully known as DUMP, which focuses on one of Britain's most endangered, highly useful insect groups, and about which she's going to talk this evening. So it's Dung Beetles on the Downs. Over to you, Sally Ann.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, I am obsessed with insects and especially dung beetles. I come from a farming background, and as a result, to me, dung beetles were the thing to follow. When you become an entomologist, you have to study different groups because it's such a vast amount of life there. It dominates the trophic level above plants. So basically, I was interested in beetles, which makes me a coleopterist, and then I studied the Scarabodia group, which is dung beetles and chafers. So that's all your garden chafers. What are they called? Maybugs, all that sort of thing as well. And then I specialised into dung beetles, which led me to pastoral ecology, which fits in very nicely with farming. And I actually study one particular group of dung beetles, one species in that. And at the moment, I'm concentrating on the mite that it carries around with it. So you tend to go down a bit of a rabbit hole with it all. But I'm just going to take you across. This is a view from the part of the downs that we're farming. And as you go along the B4000 towards Ashbury, we are the last two fields, grass fields on the left-hand side, and they're run as one field. So although there's a fence line that separates them, the gate is normally always open and it's run as one field. So I'm an honorary associate of the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, which is the building you can see there, and you probably recognise. If you haven't been, please do. We are not the Pitt Rivers. Everyone thinks we're the Pitt Rivers. We're not. The Pitt Rivers is a separate museum behind us, but you have to go through our museum to get to that museum. And what you have on display is a tiny amount of what we have got in collections. So we've got over 7 million objects and counting in collections at present. And it's actually a university teaching museum. So you have the main gallery area with objects on display, lots of doors around the outside. And if you go behind those doors, there's lecture theatres, there's laboratories and all sorts of different things going on. In fact, there's storerooms underneath the grass in front, which is why nothing much is put there. I'm in the entomology department, so I'm up in the attic because my things are tiny and don't weigh a lot. So we're up in the attic, which is a bit of a downside at the moment because my room that I work in most of the time hasn't got a window. So I've hardly been in the museum at all since COVID started, which I'm missing hugely. But one thing I wanted to do was we set DUMP up, the Dung Beetle mapping project. And we set that up because we were contacted to put basically our data into the IUCN report, which is also known as the State of Nature report. And this involved us doing a whole new recording on dung beetle species throughout the UK and a bit further afield as well. So I spent 6 years, basically, just over 6 years, going all over the UK, recording species. And it starts in the museum. And what I'm looking for is species of dung beetle specimens that have got their data labels with them. And that's really, really important because if I don't have the data label, I haven't got a point that I can put on a map. Because if it's just a dung beetle, even if it's in a museum in Surrey or wherever it is around the UK, the beetle might not have been collected from there. That collection would have come in from somebody else anywhere. And so that's no good. And if I've got a pin, a load of frass, which is insect poo, basically, and the data label, that's no good either because it means that something's been in there, eaten the dung beetle. And although the data label might say it's one particular species, unless I've actually got that beetle in front of me and I'm looking down a microscope and I'm actually keying it out and making sure it is that species, the person who labeled it might have got it wrong because dung beetles are very hard to identify. And a lot of the species actually require microscope work. And so we've also split species since the Victorian stage. So whereas they might have said it's this species, it might have actually been a different species. And although they look virtually identical, and we're talking about one hair that might be different, or one little tiny little hole on the elytra or something like that, basically, if the beetle is not that species, it will require a different habitat and different things that affect it. So it would cause a problem there. But also I would be saying, oh yes, this beetle is here on my map. And then when we go and find it, or somebody else tries to go and find it in 10 years' time or so, they say, actually, this species is not there. And they record it as locally extinct when it was actually never there in the first place. However, my work was, first of all, to find out what we're losing. I had to find out what we had. So that's what I spent a lot of time going all over the place doing. This is the result of that work. And it was really quite shocking, really, because over 50% of our dung beetles in the UK are of concern to regionally extinct to actually we've lost some species too. And this was quite shocking because these dung beetles do an awful lot for us, and they're economically important insects. And you don't realise how important dung beetles are until you really speak to somebody who's farming out in Australia, Tasmania, places like that, New Zealand, because they took an awful lot of cattle and sheep over to those places, and they based a massive agricultural industry on that. And it was a huge income to those countries or continent. And they had a big problem because in the 1940s, they had so many flies that they were having a big problem with disease within the human community and the animals, and it's being transported between the two. They were losing grazing because all the grazing was pasture fouled. That meant that there was feces still on it. It wasn't being broken down and the animals wouldn't graze there. Lots of parasites, lots of problems. And that was a period when people sort of talked about the corks on the Australian hats. And so basically, they started to look around at what they can do about this. And when they went out to look at the dung pats that were still there, they realized that actually these dung pats had not been broken down because the dung beetles that were in Australia weren't eating the dung. So why weren't the Australian beetles eating them? And that's because those beetles have evolved alongside marsupial mammals. And therefore, the dung from bovine and ovine, cows and sheep, was not palatable. They weren't eating it. And so they actually had to shop around for dung beetle species in other countries that were suitable for the temperature, for the climate, for the soils, breed them in captivity. They brought over 100 species back. Only, I think I'm trying to think how many it is. It's around about 40, 60 species, I think, actually were able to be bred in captivity to be released. And they are now using them to break down the dung. So if it wasn't for the dung beetles, their industry of livestock industry would have come to a grinding halt, and with it a lot of disease and problems too. So they're really, really important. And when you look at it from that point of view, you realize how important they are for us as well. So if our beetles are going extinct slowly, we are also looking at big problems. So this is something we had to do a lot of work about. So dung beetles, you're going to know so much about dung beetles at the end of this. So dung beetles, we don't have any rollers in the UK. Those are beetles that literally make the dung into a ball and run away with it. And then they'll bury it and they'll either lay an egg on it or they'll consume it themselves. But we do have tunnelers and we do have dwellers. So we have three particular groups, which I'll talk about in a minute, but the tunnelers and dwellers. When we look at the rollers, that's because what's happening here is it's all about competition for food. In the UK, our climate is as it is, we're Northern Hemisphere, and our dung beetles can actually sit in the dung and they have very little competition. So we have quite a lot of insects or dung beetles that are dwellers, actually living in the dung. They have their larvae in the dung, they breed in the dung, etc., etc. They eat the dung and they just stay in the dung. Not much competition. If you go to a warmer area, somewhere like Africa, something like that, then you get the rollers. And then what they're doing is there's a bit more competition for the dung. So they're grabbing the dung, they're packing it into balls, and then they're rolling away with it. And you actually get ones that actually specialize in stealing those dung balls off the ones that have made the dung balls. So they don't make their own dung balls, they steal them off somebody else. And that's, again, it's all by competition. So it's about getting that dung away, hiding it, making sure you've got it for yourself. If you go to the rainforest areas, you've got less mammals, a lot more insects, a lot more competition. And those dung beetles have actually got adaptations that allow them to hang on to the anuses of the animals, so they're on source when the dung arrives. So it's this sort of thing, you know, it's all based around competition. So you get different dung beetles active at different times of the day. The decomposition state of the dung is very important. Some like it dry, some like it a bit wetter, some like it on one way or another. They're very, very sensitive. Some of the species that are really sensitive are the ones that are in trouble. And this is the same with all our insect groups. The species that are sensitive and easily affected by change, they're the ones that are struggling, not the actual generalists. So the quality of the dung is really important to dung beetles, and also the soil, because the tunnelers in particular, they're making these tunnels underneath the ground, and that is where they're drawing in the dung into brood balls, laying their eggs on it, and their larvae are developing and pupa are developing from the larvae. So if the soil has anything different about it, that affects them hugely. These things are quite small, so it does affect them. We're also looking at other things in dung. And when people say to me, oh, you know, I've got loads of dung beetles in my dung, absolutely loads. I do worming, I do this, I do that, you know, and my dung beetles are fine. I've got loads of them. Invariably, they're not dung beetles. There's lots of other insects that do live in dung. And three of the main groups of beetles are down on the bottom of the screen there. The one with the yellowy bottom to it, if you like, that is a hydrophiliid. And it's a water scavenger beetle. So these beetles have actually evolved and adapted to live in the dung. They're water beetles, but they now live and breed in the dung. Some of the adults eat dung, so they are important in the fact that they're breaking down the dung. Some of the adults and all the larvae eat other insects. So it depends on which species they are as to what they do there. But they're mainly predators. And then you've got the staphylids, the rove beetles. That's the thin one in the middle. It always sort of, if you think about a stoat going down a hole, these things go very fast down the holes of the dung beetles and hydrophilids and all the other beetles. And they're going down there to hunt down fly eggs and maggots and things like that, and other beetles as well. Lots of different species. There's a rove beetle, a staphylid, that is quite big, that you sometimes see out and about. It's not connected to dung, but it's called a devil's coach horse. So if you've ever seen one of those, they tend to curl their abdomen up when they're alarmed. So it's the same family. And then the beetle on the far end there, that is hysterid. It's a clown beetle, and it's an absolute tank of a beetle. It's much smaller than my little fingernail, but it is just body armor and jaws, and that will just munch its way through anything. So you're not necessarily seeing dung beetles when you see beetles in dung. So the three groups that we have in the UK are Omphoteins, which are our true scarabs. So if you think of the Egyptians with their amulets and what they were using for their mummies, they were worshipping the dung beetle, very sensibly worshipping the dung beetle. And they believed it was a dung beetle rolling the sun across the sky. So therefore it was a good luck, a charm and an amulet. So that's the true scarab we have in the UK. But as we're north of the hemisphere, these species are really quite small. Again, fingernail size, little fingernail size, and a bit smaller. So we've got 6 species in the UK. We've already lost some of those. And then the Geotropics are our big door beetles. You often see them flipped over, and they're very iridescent on their body. And we've got 8 species in those in the UK. We've lost some of those as well. And then the Omphoteins are the biggest group that we've got, and they actually live in the dung, and they're the dwellers, if you like. And they vary in size from a couple of millimeters to just about a centimeter or so. So 43 species in the UK, and we've lost a few of those species as well. So the larvae and the eggs of the dwellers actually develop within the dung, and the adults sort of mash the dung up, macerate it, and they suck all the juices out of the dung, and the larvae eat the solids. So that works really nicely. If you've got the adults drying it out for the larvae, and then the larvae eating the other bit, that's how they work. So in my hand on the right-hand side, or it might be your right-hand side on your screen, is some Phaetidus. So a really lovely little Omphotein beetle that's red. We don't know why dung beetles have colour on their bodies. We don't know what's going on with that. There's something also going on with the ridges and all sorts of things. There's so much we don't know about dung beetles because they lived in dung. And whereas the Victorians and everybody were running around with nets catching every moth and butterfly going, we have vast knowledge and expansive collections of these species. We have not so much knowledge on the dung beetles simply because they live in dung. And then on the side there, you can see my hand in comparison to one of the Geotropics. And it's made a little tunnel. It's arrived at night beside the dung heap. It's made a little tunnel, and it's now pulling the dung down into the tunnel. Some of those tunnels can go down to a meter, so quite a big depth, and that's in there. And the larvae and the egg and the pupa case, that will all happen underground with that one. Some of the dwellers, the Omphoteins, we've got a couple that parasitize the tunnelers, so it's not all straightforward, basically. So dung beetles, what do they do for us? Why are they beneficial? Why am I so concerned about them? Why do I think every other farmer should be very concerned about them? And anybody who's into their biodiversity? Well, these are some of the things that they do. They reduce the pasture fouling. So that's where dung just stays on the surface. And if it just stays on the surface, the animals can't eat around it, and it will host parasites and all sorts of different things. They reduce costs, because if you've got lots of dung beetles working and removing that dung, you don't have to do your harrowing or anything. And they reduce parasites. They actually carry a little mite on their body, and you can see the little mite on the top picture. And it's clustered on the dung beetle, on the underside of the dung beetle. It's not causing that dung beetle any undue stress or anything. It's actually catching a lift. It's a symbiotic relationship. When the dung beetle gets to the dung, the mite drops off. It can't get there without the dung beetle, and then it whizzes off and it hunts down fly eggs and fly maggots. So great for the livestock owner, and good news for the dung beetle, because if the fly eggs and the fly hatch into maggots and the maggots really start to grow, what's there for the dung beetle when he arrives is not the cow dung or the horse dung, it's actually the fly maggot dung, if you like. So it's not a good habitat, and nothing that they can actually eat. So this relationship's very good. And if the dung beetle, I'm whizzing through this so fast because I've got so much to tell you, I get very excited about this. If the dung beetle breaks down the dung very quickly, then there's lots of different parasites that actually move through the gut of livestock into the dung alive. They'll then spend another stage in their life cycle in the dung before they migrate into the grass, and they get consumed again, and the cycle just goes round and round and round. And if the dung beetle's there and it removes that dung, then that cycle is broken and that parasite cannot continue. So they do things like that. They're reducing greenhouse gases, because when that dung is on the ground and it's capped by weather, sun, wind, that sort of thing, it'll continue to ferment and release methane. So by the dung beetles getting in there, breaking it down, removing all that moisture within the dung pat and everything, they prevent that continual methane production. Obviously, taking the dung a meter or so underground increases the fertility, organic matter, aeration. Yes, if you've got a tunnel the size of your thumb and it's going down to at least a meter, you are going to increase the soil aeration. And the biggest component in soil is it's the air, it's the oxygen. You can see my hand at the bottom, middle one there. That's up every single. I've chose the wrong color. There's lots of pink stars, and every single one of those stars is a hole by a geotropid. And that's about the size of my finger, thumb, and they're going down in that area where I went and saw that particular pat. Those holes were all going down about a foot each. So that does make a big difference for compaction, water quality, and all sorts of things like that as well. They also increase the biodiversity above ground and below ground. We get an awful lot more invertebrate activity below ground. We get a lot more bacteria and fungus and all sorts of things going on below ground if we've got dung beetles. And if we've got dung beetles above ground, loads of things eat them, basically. A lot of my work, I spent a couple of years on a contract working in Jersey, and my work there was to work with the Darrell Trust with their chuff releasing project, because their chuffs ate my dung beetles. So it was about getting the dung beetle numbers up. And bats in particular are very prone to eating dung beetles. And in fact, one of our dung beetle species, Rufopes, is virtually, it's intricately linked to bat survival. So, you know, these things are really important for our biodiversity. So I'm whizzing you through. Cattle. Why do we need lots of dung beetles? Because our livestock produce quite a lot of dung. Cattle can produce 6% of their body weight in dung every year. That's 9 tons of dung per year per cow, which is really quite a large amount of dung if you think about it. Sheep is about 800 kgs of dung per year, and horses, it varies obviously because of the size of the horse. This is taken from a 16-hand high horse, and it's 6.5 tons of dung per year. So that's all being broken down in your fields, and that's really, really important, because if it wasn't, we'd all be in a lot of trouble. So why are we losing our dung beetles? Why are they going extinct? Why am I concerned? Well, there's lots of different reasons. One is livestock removal. In fact, that's probably the most important concern. I do a lot of peer reviews on papers, and at the moment, I'm forever peer reviewing at the effects of chemical treatments. We know that they're having a negative effect on dung beetles, but actually one of the biggest problems is the livestock removal. If you haven't got livestock, you haven't got dung, you haven't got habitat. That's it. So livestock removal is really problematic. Soil disturbance. So every time you harrow, plow, or do anything like that, you're opening up the soil, you're allowing predators to come in, and you're exposing those larvae and the pupa. And that, again, is having a huge effect on dung beetles. Change of land use, well, that pretty much goes with livestock removal. If you've got cattle one year and then you've concreted over the next year, that's complete habitat loss. And then chemical treatments. So dung beetles are struggling, especially the sensitive ones. And if you're using any chemical treatments for parasite control, they are insecticides. And they will have a certain lifetime of activity in the dung, causing it to be toxic. So the longer your treatment covers your animal's parasite cycle, the longer the dung being produced is toxic. These dung beetles arrive, the first thing they do is eat the dung, and that's the end of that for them. In the first week, so if it's a 6-week product, so it's a 4-week product that will cover your animal for 4 weeks. In the first week, this is very generalized, but basically in the first week, your dung beetles will eat it and will die. The adults will die. In the second week, the toxicity is breaking down a bit more. So they will have other problems. So something like navigational problems, fertility problems, and larval problems, and pupal development problems. So, you know, it's a constant problem until that dung has come through without those chemicals in. All the chemicals used for parasite treatments are insecticides. So that's obviously what the problem is there. But again, as I say, if you don't have this livestock, then you're in big trouble because you haven't got anywhere for the dung beetles. So what can you do? What are we working with farmers? We're looking at alternative parasite controls. We're trying to bring in different management ideas. We're making sure we've got cattle out there and sheep out there all the time, trying to keep them there, trying to encourage farmers to keep a few animals active all year round, because the dung beetles are active all year round. And another threat to dung beetles is climate change. As our climate is going through all these spikes, we're getting weird and wonderful weather spikes, especially in the early spring. You get this really, really warm week when everything else is, freezing the week before and then freezing the week after. The dung beetles will actually come out of their overwintering state, their diapause, and as they fly around and try and find food, they're using their energy. And if the food isn't there, then they will die off, and you won't have them coming out when you've got your food there later on in the year for them, the dung. So that's having lots of effects. We're seeing this also with things like bumblebees. The queens are coming out of hibernation in that week, and if they can't find the flowers, then they're dying off because of their energy, and you're losing whole colonies. So this is a big problem for insects. Native breeds are best. They absolutely love native breeds. This dung beetle assemblage has been with us since the Neolithic, probably the Mesolithic, definitely the Neolithic. And so they like our native cow dung. And they love unimproved pasture. They're not keen on fertilizers and things like that. So we don't know the effects of fungicides and herbicides and things on them as such, but we do know that many of the species don't appreciate nitrogen. So that has an effect on them. I'm going to say stop dung removal for horses in particular. I suspect that's a bit difficult with horses. A lot of people will poo pick, but it's a totally different system because of the way the grassland's managed and everything else. But ideally, leave some dung before your dung beetles. So why are you using long-acting treatments? Well, this is what fly strike looks like. Fly strike is really quite unpleasant. The fly lays its eggs on a sweaty part on the sheep, sweaty or mucky part on the sheep, especially in thundery, warm, close weather. And then the maggots hatch and they basically eat the sheep from the outside in. And maggots, when they get together, they get quite warm, and the warmer they get, the quicker they go through their life cycle, the quicker they eat their food, and it can happen quite quickly. They'll basically kill the sheep by eating it outside in. This is a ram that we got to quite early on, we were able to treat, and you can see he's pretty much fully recovered, and he made a full recovery. But that's why a lot of farmers are using blanket treatments. They didn't used to have to use them because they used to have a shepherd who would work with his sheep all the time. And if anything like that started, he would see it and he would deal with it. And unfortunately, that's not a viable option these days. So disappearing dung. This is what happens with dung when it's got earthworms. And this is, dung beetles. And this has happened within a week. So there's our cow pat. And the beetles have already come in now. I've got several different species of beetles working on this cow pat. Some like to live under it, some like to live in it. When they live in it, they might like to live near the crusty bit. They might like to live in the wet bit in the middle. They've got different areas that they like to live in. That's their habitat. And they're really breaking it down, and there's more dung beetles are there. There's more insects coming in. There's more earthworm activity underneath the dung pat as well, because the beetles are breaking it down. Then the birds are coming in. They're scattering it around because there's food in there for them. The plants are now growing, and eventually it's gone. And what you've got left is pretty much just soil. So it's a combination of the dung beetles, all the other beetles and things coming in as well, the fungi mixing up the bacteria, and all the other things that are coming in and eating that dung and moving it. So when we're thinking about dung beetles, we're thinking about piles of dung. The dung pile is quite important because if it's a real horrible splattery wet splodge, the dung beetles can't live in it because they might drown in it. It's too wet. They haven't got any food there once it starts to get dry by the sun because it's so shallow. It'll dry out to a crisp. So there's no food for them, and there's no protection. They can easily get caught by birds and various other things that are after them. So one of the best piles of dung there is the one on the top left-hand corner. That's a mountain of dung. That's superb, that is. That's dung beetle heaven there. Loads of dung. They're going to be nicely protected. It's got ridges in it as well, so it's easy for them to access. And that's exactly what the dung beetles are after. Some species like dung when it's in the shade. Some species like dung when it's partially in the shade. Some like dung when it's in the full sun. Some like it on the ground with no grass. Some like it on long grass. You know, some like it in sandy soils. Some like it in clay heavy soils. You know, all these different things affect the different species because the dung is their actual habitat. So forget the field. That's not their habitat. It's the actual dung pile that is their habitat. So I've been all over the country looking at dung beetles, and I've also had to look at lots of different dung. I've been very excited about some of the stuff I've done. If you're into your dung beetles and you're into a livestock, this is a wonderful combination of the two. So we've been all over the place, and it's been quite interesting looking at the different lifestyle stock. I've even been collecting dung beetles from rhinos and elephants and all sorts of things alongside just cattle and sheep and llamas and buffalo, bison, the Chillingham wild cattle. They were quite exciting. I was expecting them to be huge auroch-like beasts, and they weren't much bigger than my Dexters, but they were great fun to work with. Yak up in the Cairngorms, we've got a yak herd. All sorts of different things, and that was really quite exciting and quite interesting because our dung beetles are quite preferable. We have, again, some generalists that I can find in rhino dung, even in a tortoise dung, but most of them are trying to stay to the native species that we have in the UK. So, and I'm up the top there looking particularly cold. In fact, you can only just see my fingertips. That's because I'm up in Scotland at I think that was -10. It was pretty cold. I'm on top of the edge of a loch there that's totally frozen, trying to prove that dung beetles are active in southern of the part of the UK, not in the northern part of the UK, because at the moment we've been saying, or previous to that, we've been saying that dung beetles are active all year round throughout the UK. And it takes a mad scientist to go up there and explain that they're not active. So this is one of our dung beetles we have lost in the UK. This is the horned dung beetle, Norris. It's a beast of a dung beetle, absolutely gorgeous, squeaks like a mouse when you pick it up, really, really lovely. They do this striation and they're just adorable. I got so excited to see these because I've only ever seen them dead in collections. And I went over to Jersey because we thought that might be a chance of seeing them alive there. They are on the continent, but we did find them in Jersey. Really, really excited to work with them. And shortly after we recorded them and everything, we found out that actually all beetle, although flower recordings come to the UK, beetle recordings now go to France. So having found them over there, we can't claim them as ours. And yes, we have lost them off our species list completely in the UK. And it's a huge shame, because a pair of these would have removed a whole dung pat, a cow dung pat, and a horse dung pat, because these are big beetles, that's what they're going for, within a matter of hours, really. So, you know, we've lost an amazing beetle, and chances of getting it back are very, very slim. So it was last recorded in 1974, and we've done everything we can to find it, and it's just not there. So when we try to find dung beetles, I will go into collections, I will collect all the data from historic collections, put points on maps, and then I'll overlay it with Google Earth, and I'll see whether those fields and those places are towns or fields, and if they're fields, if they're livestock fields, etc. And then we go out and start looking for them in those places. Yeah, unfortunately, this beetle is definitely gone now. So a real shame. A gorgeous, gorgeous beetle. I got off the boat. Sorry, I took a ferry out there. Found one instantly and basically sat down and cried. So it was just amazing. That was a problem. Jersey bulls are something else. I've got some quite interesting GPS tracks on myself, having been out in Jersey. This particular bull took to rolling in the turf, throwing turf at me, bellowing in my face and all sorts. And I was just behind one tiny strand of electric. Yeah, Jersey bulls are truly a different type of bull to anything I've ever experienced before, but there is a definite risk to dung beetling. So if we're working in areas like this, then I have a spotter with me, and it's their job to protect me from anything like a bull come charging. Obviously we have risk assessments and all these different things. And we also have a lot of biosecurity. So that's really important, because I don't want to be moving disease from one field to another, from one group of animals to another group of animals and everything like that. So we have to have scrub downs and things afterwards. So getting back to the main thing, this was my passion project. It very quickly turned into a passion project. Omphoteins joanni is the most adorable little dung beetle, and it is tiny. You can see one on my finger there. In our historic records, Omphoteins joanni is all over the downs. Literally, we are riddled with them. We're lousy with them. They're everywhere. So when I went up to the downs, I started thinking about this, and well, I'm farming up there, and I know that I've got sheep. I know that 2 other people have got sheep, but that's about it. Omphoteins joanni likes chalk, warm ground, and shortish grass, and it loves sheep in particular. You can find it in other dung, but it absolutely loves sheep dung. When it's at a almost pelleted stage, it's its absolute favourite. And it was a case of, well, you know, we'll go looking for it. But I'm a bit concerned, because it can't be all over the downs in the numbers we think it is, because I'm up there and the sheep aren't up there in the numbers that they used to be in. And so I decided that this would be my passion project. Luckily for me, I had a lot of land to cover, an awful lot of land, because it's all the downlands. So all the downlands in the North Wessex area of outstanding natural beauty and beyond. And I plotted all the historic data. Then I overlaid it with Google to make sure that those areas are still grassland. Omphoteins joanni is very sensitive to nitrogen, doesn't like improved pasture at all. And then we had to start plotting it out on big maps. And then I started driving around, but I had a huge area to drive around. And I mentioned to a friend of mine who is a pilot, whether there was any chance I could grab a few hours flight with him with my GPS. And basically, it's very easy to see permanent pasture from the land, from the air. It's got a different green to it than the enriched pasture. So we took some flights, and as it turned out, he told me afterwards it was a helicopter he was working on. So that was an interesting moment. But we did a few flights, and I was able to cut down on a lot of work to find the dung beetles. Did I find them? Well, the area I looked in actually didn't produce many Omphoteins joannae populations at all. And that was very, very concerning. But one area that I did find them was a very localized population. And I mean, seriously localized population. It was 8 meters by 5 meters against the fence line of my paddocks, which was in the National Trust side. And at that point, we had a grazier using our paddocks. And I said, right, well, let's, I'm doing a lot of research on dung beetles. I might bring some of the research back home. It might be easier for me to run it from home. And I can start doing different research to what we're doing in the university. Often when we're doing university research, the farm will farm around us. And then we will publish, and that will potentially go into management plans, policy, everything else. It would be quite nice to actually do some work on a farm that wouldn't necessarily farm around the research, and would actually enable me to get students here doing natural history type research, because we have very little data on these dung beetles as to how far they fly, you know, what sort of temperatures they particularly like, you know, are they all breeding in one dung pat, are they moving around, you know, there's lots of natural history data that we don't have, and it's often not funded. So I took on the ground and decided it was time to farm for dung beetles and actually create a reserve for dung beetles and see what we can do. So we did loads of research work as to what species we got there, and the count was extremely low. And the population of Omphoteins joannae was very dangerously close to being not genetically viable. So first thing we did was remove the grazier that was there and bring in our own animals, and we brought in native animals, and the sheep we brought in are the Wilshire horns. So Wilshire horn sheep are Wilshire horned sheep, they are wool sheep, they're hair sheep, not fleecy woolly sheep. So my sheep look quite bald most of the year, basically. They're in their winter coats right now, and people think I've shorn them, but they are a Roman sheep. We think they came from the Romans. They've all got horns, rams and ewes, and they're really well suited for warm chalk grassland. They absolutely love it, and they're brilliant for it. And of course, they're producing the native dung that's perfect for my native dung beetles. Then we needed to bring in cattle as well. And so we brought in Dexters, because my son loves his cattle and wanted to show cattle. He was only little at the time, so we got him a little cow to show, and he promptly bred them, and we now had a herd of Dexters. So you would have seen the sheep and the cows along the side of the road. So that's why those groups were brought in. And what we were doing with the sheep was quite interesting, because we were following them for parasite burdens. They were all regularly blood tested, regularly fetal egg count tested. They were kept in small groups at first, so we could count them for parasites. If they had high parasite burdens, they were removed from the flock. It's taken me a long time to build up this rather special flock that has as least treatments as possible, and that we've done the same with the cattle. So calcareous grassland itself, oh my goodness, is this important grassland. Now, I'm a Suffolk girl from the Suffolk-Norfolk border area, really. So I'm used to flat ground for a start, and this is like the Alps to me. And also I'm used to very peaty soils, and thin chalk soil is something different. It just behaves totally different. Everything, the way your waters work, everything. So calcareous grassland is rarer than primary tropical rainforest. Wow, that is a statement and a half. It is. Basically, it's so special. The whole of the Downs was grassland. This grassland's been there since the last ice age, and it hasn't been ploughed up. Most of it has not been ploughed up until the post-war, when people were in a state where they needed to get maximum cropping, and so a lot of the downs was ploughed up at that point. So it was being ploughed up slightly before that, and more has been ploughed up a bit since, but not that reduction of grassland now has pretty much ceased. However, what we're left with are small pockets, fragments of fragmented habitat. And the plants in them, the flowers in them invariably are quite rare because the habitats are quite rare. But calcareous grassland should be open. And this is where I have run into problems with other groups. So I'm working with insects, and these particular insects need the grassland. If I'm working with my bird people, they want to see a few trees around for their birds. So, I don't want to see any trees on this grassland. So, there's different views as to what you're actually trying to do, but we wanted the dung beetles. So a lovely open area. And then, of course, winterbournes, which you know about because you have your own winterbourne. The Wiltshire horn sheep, this is what they are. Over 700,000 were registered on the downs in the 18th century. They don't have wool, so when the wool trade came around, the Wiltshire horns went out of fashion. They were pretty much lost, and then a couple of people kept them as a bit of a folly, a bit of an interest, and luckily that saved the breed. And there's now 300 flocks registered, probably a bit more than that actually. And they've actually been shipped out to Australia and used as one of the crossbreed bases out in Australia because they don't have the fleck wool, so they're not so prone to fly strike and things like that. So that was a good move to have them. They are really lovely sheep, and they're well suited to that ground, and they don't need all the treatments that the others do. Dexter Cattle, again, these are little tiny cattle from Ireland, sorry. They are quite docile, they're rather lovely, but they'll eat anything pretty much. They'll munch their way into tall grass a little bit. We want to try and reduce the tall grass. That's the lightest grass that you can see at the back there. It's actually gone over because this is a winter photograph, and the tall grass gives that light look to the downs. It's quite invasive, tall grass. We do want tall grass there, but not everywhere. Lots of things over winter in the tussocks, they're really quite important. Even your water boatmen, things like that, will overwinter in those tussocks. But if it gets the hang of the grassland, it will completely outcompete the very fragile communities of plants that are on the grassland there. So the cattle are a good way to get into it. Sheep can't get into it, it's too tough for them, but the cattle can. There are Dexters, what we got there. We had a slight problem with the Wiltshire horns in the fact that invariably they don't want to go into lamb until they're at least 2, and they will often have singles. They aren't particularly milky. So this research project has to make some money. That's really important. I'm not fully funded for this at all. I have to make sure that I make a profit out of it, or certainly make an income out of it. I'm not financed through the main farming family or anything. This is totally separate. So we also had to, basically, to be in the green, you have to be in the black in many respects. And I can stand up in front of farmers and I talk all over the place. I'm at the Real Farmers, at Real Oxford Farming Conference. I talk at Groundswell, all sorts of different places to farmers. And if I stand up there and say, it's amazing, do all this thing, you get these dung beetles, it's all wonderful, you get lots of things happening. And they say, well, that's marvelous, we want to do that. What's our profit margin? And I say, well, nothing. In fact, you'll probably be in deficit. It's not going to have the uptake. So it's quite important that I can actually make these animals make a profit in many respects. So what we do is we have these Wiltshire horns crossed with cleans. I'm just trying to, whoops, sorry, let's go that way. Here we are, just do that there. So can you hear me all right? I'll just very quickly. Yeah, brilliant. So we're crossing the Wiltshire Horns with Cleans. So Cleans are Welsh mountain sheep. They're very big sheep, very meaty sheep, if you like, because that's what they're producing. And they will often have twins or triplets. So we cross them with the Wiltshire Horns. Anything that's woolly has to leave. Anything that's fleeceless, we keep. And that increases the profitability on the sheep, whilst trying to keep all those important parts of the breed. We have done the same with the cattle. You will start seeing more belted Galloways on those fields. And this is because, again, you know, the Dexters aren't producing the final product in the same amount. And so making them the ground pay, we've had to increase the size of our breed. That's corresponded in the increase in the size of Child, because he's now 6'7". So a 6'7" person showing a 4-foot high cow wasn't great for his street cred, basically. So the belted Galloways have arrived, and the first lot came up from Dartmoor. And we've got more now that we've bred as well. So we've got quite a big herd of belted Galloways. And the Dexters are pretty much all gone. We've kept Doris. Doris is our lead cow, our alpha. She's hefted to the hill, and she babysits the herd now. Doris is no longer able to have calves of her own, but she owes us nothing and we owe her a lot, so she stays. So you'll see one very bossy little cow that's as high as it's wide that runs in that herd, and she's the one who leads it. These cows are being naturally kept, as naturally as we can possibly keep them. So if they need certain minerals at certain times of the year, they will go and find them. They'll make scrapes. And that's quite important, because that changes and makes more of a mosaic of habitats on the hill as well. So you'll see these areas where they dig out certain minerals at certain times of the year. You will see them behaving in different ways. They spread out when they graze, all sorts of different things going on. The Belties have found it hot on the downs. Really, on those hills get very hot. The grass is quite close. The chalk's very close to the top, and so the ground gets very, very warm, and the Belties have struggled a bit in the summer, and we had to take them off and move them to some other ground we've got with shade. This will be less of a problem as we breed more of them. These guys came straight off Dartmoor, the original bunch, so they're extremely hairy, and it will take them time to basically lose that hairiness, and they'll be able to cope a bit better. Oops, what's it doing now? Go away, right. So what are they doing? Well, this is the important thing. We're going back to the dung beetles now as well. As these cows have been brought in to increase dung beetles and to save those Omphoteins joannae groupings, they have done a whole load of other things. You get slumps on these areas. So the soil, as it slumps down from the chalk faces on those hillsides, it gets walked on by the animals, and that forms these ridges all the way down. And that's what is another habitat. So you get different plants in those slumps as they go along, and they're stabilizing those fronts of the combes, if you like, the little hills. By doing that, they're sort of buffeting it back up again. The way these animals are grazing, and by the fact that they're there all year round, is opening up large areas for plants to come in. So we've got a lot of plants coming back into this site. And what's really been interesting is we've got a whole load of plants that are very rare that have reappeared. And they've been reappearing over the last sort of decade that I've been recording. And 5 years ago, we had our first autumn gentians arrive. And now we've got an awful lot of autumn gentians alongside a whole host of other red data list flowers, which is really, really special. And they have come in, and we've got students working on some research at the moment to prove that we've actually we've reactivated the original seed bank because we've got the habitat right, rather than these things have actually come in because we've got the habitat right. And we're hoping to prove that the former rather than the latter. So really exciting to see them, and loads of other flowers up there as well. We're trying to make sure the scrub doesn't encroach. The cattle are doing a great job on that. Basically our counts on all our insects, all our reptiles, all our mammals, even our flowers, bryophytes, all sorts of different things. They're not bryophytes, the mosses and lichens and things. Everything is increasing rapidly, and it started to increase rapidly in the last 8 years. Suddenly everything has gone into hyperdrive, and we're getting new species pretty much every year at the moment, and many of them are on the red data list and on the special list. So that's really, really important. And we've now got a registered wildlife site that goes across the whole of the area, which is awesome. My control, I have to say, is the National Trust land on the other side of the fence. Omphoteins joanni has not increased its range. In fact, it's decreased, and it's now increased right across the whole of the 70 acres we've got next door. The dung, if you go into that field, the dung is there, it's everywhere. The dung on my side has gone. The wildflower list we've got on our side is huge. It's right to Rome, which enables me to go across and just do a quick bit of surveying over the fence and monitor how it's going over there. Yeah, it's hugely impressive what's gone on our side of the fence. It might not look like it when you drive past, but that is what it looks like when you're in it. And these calcareous grasslands are like alpine meadows. The plants are very small, and they don't grow very tall. It's not like you're wading through fields and fields of oxeye daisies. They're actually quite small, fragile and delicate. You will see when you walk amongst it out there, and I do field walks if anyone is interested later on, various different times of the year. I do take people out to see all the flowers and things. It is absolutely stunning, but as you whiz past with a car, it'll just look green, but it is absolutely stunning. And with these flowers, of course, come a whole host of other invertebrates. So this one's, I love this photo. It's a beautiful one, sunset, evening, looking back towards Ashbury direction, and you'll see a little tiny glow on the corner of the screen, on the right-hand side corner of the screen. That's a glowworm. We've got 3 colonies of glowworms now on that bank and across the other side. Absolutely brilliant. We're doing work with bats. We're monitoring how the bats are feeding. They're coming out of the woods. They're whizzing over the National Trust, coming straight over to us to feed. We have moth trappings going on 4 times a year. It looks like we've got UFOs landed if anyone's driving past late at night. That's us up there with moth traps. We're running mammal traps. We're running all sorts of different things to monitor, to get the data that we need for this. And it's all happening because of the dung beetles. Once we got the dung beetles right, everything else fell into place. So actually, I'm going to very quickly talk to you very quickly about this. In the middle there, you will see a lizard. The lizard numbers were low when we came onto the site. They're now quite improved. They are everywhere. It's been really interesting because as the cattle have moved up through the tall grass, they have taken the dung up with them. We've increased the dung beetle species. So every time the cow goes to the loo up in the tall grass, that increases the other invertebrates, especially the earthworms. They will follow the cow dung that's got the dung beetles in. The moles are now following the earthworms. So their moles are actually going up the hill. As the moles do their tunneling, they push up soil, lots of chalk because they're quite close to the chalk. And then the lizards will come out early, and in amongst the tussock grass, they will go and sun themselves on the tiny bits of chalk on the top of those mole hills. And then they will have the food there because the dung's there that's brought all the other insects in as well. And that's part of the huge increase we've got in the lizards. So, you know, it's about getting systems right. And the dung beetles are the key to this system. And getting it right means that we've now got all this wonderful plants and everything else going on. So we do a lot of teaching here. I do an awful lot of teaching. This place is called Berrycroft Hub. I'm so obsessed that I've created a laboratory and classroom system in my own house. So we have students come from all over the world doing research work and identification work. They're working here. I've got Tanya, who came from Belgium, Merrick, who came from Denmark. We have people literally from all over the world coming here doing research based around those fields. This is Victoria. She was doing work with stable isotopes, looking at carbon cycling with dung beetles and cows and things like that. So this is all dung beetle based research that comes from all over the world that we do here. And of course, this is the centre where I directly engage farmers to change how they are managing their livestock. And we're doing what we can to alleviate the problem we've got with dung beetles And then we get them up in the field. So if you're driving past and you see gangs of people up there, they are with me looking at dung, basically, and the dung beetles. So we do lots and lots of this sort of stuff. And I do lots of television and media stuff to basically bring dung beetles back to the forefront and get them out there, because they are so important, both economically and for our biodiversity. So I'm obsessed with dung. As you might have gathered, up on the left there is my mobile phone. I have children, I have dogs, I have all sorts of different things, but I'm totally obsessed with dung, because each one of those I'm looking at is a habitat, a micro habitat. I've been dung beetling all over the country in every weather going. I'm hiding from midges down the bottom there in some godforsaken place in Scotland. I can't remember where I was, but I remember the midges were horrific. And I'm actually wearing my jumper over my head because it was just miserable. In the top, I had to go out with mountain rescue because I only had 4 days on a particular area in Wales, and the fog came in so badly on the mountains. I was doing high altitude species that Mountain Rescue very kindly agreed to do some of their training days with me tagging along behind, bagging and picking up and bagging dung with all my dung beetles in, and up in the Orkneys on the right hand side collecting dung beetles there. And I can't remember where I am at the bottom, but it was very, very wet, obviously. So traveling all over the place looking for all these different dung beetles. But yes, dung beetles are really, really important. So that piece of ground that you see going to Ashbury on your way between Lambourn and Ashbury is internationally important for the dung beetle work that's gone on there. We've now got 27 species of dung beetles present, and we've basically saved the Omphoteins joannae in this area. So it's quite exciting. So that is me. That's a whistle-stop tour through some dung beetles. I now need to work out how to stop sharing for you. There we are. Right, can you hear me now? I think I've got you all on mute.
Right.
There we are. Right, I can just about hear you. There we are.
Right. I don't know whether anybody has any questions from. Well,
I'd like to say something. I think it's been absolutely fascinating, and I told a friend about your talk, Sally Ann, and she said, "Oh, my neighbour. This is a friend in Kent. My neighbour has illustrated a book on dung beetles." And I wondered whether you'd heard of it.
What's the name of the book?
It's called Behold, the Beautiful Dung Beetle by Cheryl Bardo.
That's quite a new one, isn't it, I think?
2013, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you're interested, I'll send you the link. But I just thought, how amazing. She said, "Oh, I'd love to listen to the talk, but I'm going somewhere or other and I can't do it." But my neighbour illustrated a book on it. I just thought,
they are getting out there. They've been very overlooked, or basically because of where they live, which is why we chose when we did our research project originally to collect data. I now run a different group because that project's now closed, and I now run a different group called Dung Beetles for Farmers, which is more about carrying on the conservation work, really. But we chose the acronym DUMP and then put the words around it to try and get people on board with this whole sort of dung beetle thing, really, because it puts people off, and you can't ask people to go and look for dung beetles like you can do citizen science with so many other species, because of the disease risk of both the animals and the humans. So and obviously being charged at by bulls and things. So yeah.
I mean, somebody like Chris Packham's always talking about dung and poo, and isn't he?
Yes.
So I mean, it's quite acceptable these days.
Yes, I mean,
I've absolutely loved your talk, and I won't hog the conversation. I'm sure other people want to say things.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
When we were in Canberra in the 70s, we had friends who were working on introducing dung beetles, and they were taking a lot of trouble to make sure they didn't introduce any parasites with the dung beetles.
Yes.
So they had people rolling the the larva into dung and then letting it hatch and then letting them lay eggs and then doing the same thing before they release them. So these people had job descriptions just as dung rollers.
Absolutely. I mean, insects will, they carry not only parasites, but they also carry diseases, insect-based diseases where, you know, and fungi that'll attack them and kill them and things like that. And that's part of the reason we don't do capture and removing, you know, moving insects from one area to another, because they have a whole host of things that they can spread to each other, which would be detrimental.
And of course, one of the problems was that the kangaroo dung is so different from cow dung. It was
yes. And the wombat dung is square.
Yes.
Oh, so talking about, you know, diseases and things, is this why, for example, I was going to ask you whether you could sort of reintroduce horn dung beetle, you know, if they exist on the continent and that, but perhaps that's not possible because of introducing stuff.
Yeah, there are a lot of the dung beetles we've got here are quite difficult to breed in captivity. So I've been working with the Bristol Zoological Gardens. They have an invertebrate section there. And I've been working with Mark on that about how we can breed some of these beetles in captivity. The first problem you've got is actually collecting them. Some of the rarer species, they tend to be found more on SSIs. So you've got a problem collecting. And then if you do collect, how many do you remove without causing a deficit in population there, because they're rare? And then again, you've got to screen them for diseases and fungi that they're carrying and various other things. And at the moment, we're just not ready for that. And our biggest problem with a beetle like that is making sure we've got the habitat ready for them before we bring them back. I do get involved in reintroduction projects, but what I'm passionate about is making sure you've got the right habitat before you release whatever you're trying to release.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the problems we got is actually collecting them in the first place.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come and go.
I think I've talked you all into submission.
I was going to say, if nobody else has any other questions, I mean, my first reaction to that was, wow, just wow. Yes. I don't think we've ever had anyone with the wow factor that you and your dung beetles have. It was amazing, the variety of, well, start off with a variety of dung beetles, but also all those intricate interlinking factors. You know, we talk blithely about biodiversity and ecosystems, but just listening this evening to what you've been saying, it's absolutely staggering the way it all interconnects and all basically comes back to dung. So
yeah, it does. This is the thing. You get, you know, they are a cornerstone species. So systems, it's all about systems. We talk about ecosystems, but you know, it's very much systems. And I gave the example of the lizards, but we've also got, by the increase of the flowering, so by the way the animals are grazing to get the right dung for the dung beetles, they are creating this amazing habitat, which is increasing all the flowers. Then you've got different bees coming in, and because those cattle make scrapes that they only return to it once or so a year, then you've got a habitat for solitary bees to nest in, because they need bare ground. We all talk about, you know, letting your lawns go wild and long. Please do, but not all your lawn, because a lot of bees, like ashy mining bees, they want very short grass. So have your long grass for your moss and things like that, but have your short grass for those, and then have bare soil, because that's one of the biggest threats to our solitary bees, is they haven't got nesting habitat, the ones that have to go in the ground. So the cattle are making these scrapes where these bees will go in. As you get more flowers, you also get more bumblebees come in. As you get more insects and more variety, you get more mice coming in as well, because you're getting seeds and you're getting insects and all these sort of things going on. Where you get more mice, you will get more bumblebees, because the bumblebees will go into the mice holes. Where there's more mice, you're feeding more kestrels or hobbies or whatever's feeding on those, and so on and so forth. So it's not just about what eats who, it's about providing the habitats for each of those to survive in. And we're literally, that whole area there, every single thing that moves, squeaks, squeals, digs the ground, whatever, it's all being monitored, it's all being measured. And we're actually able to see these interactions and see these increase in species. And it's been a very exciting time. Certainly, as I say, this whole project's been going for 14 years so far. It's a 40-year project. And what we've seen in the last 8 years, so it's taken really 8 years for the system to properly kick back in. And now I take students up there to find dung beetles, and our biggest problem is finding any dung.
Yeah.
But it seems a shame. It seems a shame that you've got to use the National Trust land as your what do you call it? Your control.
Yes. So I have
the National Trust should be doing the same as you.
Yeah, we are in discussion. I've got too loud now, and they can't ignore me anymore. But in the past, and it's been quite difficult because that's a big block of land that National Trust has got there, and they have required a grazier who will pay a tenancy rent, basically, and I'm unable to do that because from the way I graze my land means that I can't really afford a very high rent to make ends meet, because this is an extensive system. It has cattle and sheep all year round. In fact, they're not, this for the first time ever since I've had it. There's no livestock on that field at the moment because we're just doing the fencing, but they will be returning next week. But basically, you know, I need a lot of land to increase my animals because of my stocking density is so low. To get my return. So to take on more land I have to pay rent on doesn't make it viable. And that's something, you know, we want to work on. But the National Trust have definitely changed their direction, and we are in conversation with them at the moment. But it's been interesting. I also, where they've difference, they've had a guy who's in there managing his sheep on a very commercial level, with a different type of breed, and there's no cattle or anything like that. And he's been grazing just to do the grazing to make his ends meet with his sheep. I'm running my bit of ground specifically for the dung beetles. So it's a very different thing. So actually having them on the same geology, the same geography, absolutely the same as me, with just a wire fence separating us, was a good thing for the project.
Yeah.
I needed to prepare myself against, you know, conventional farming going on there. I've also got another area which has no livestock in it. The tall grass, we've been monitoring the tall grass, taking it over, the trees are scrubbing it over and everything else. So you have to have these different, and to run any experiment, you have to have these different you know, setups. And to be honest with you, it's been very useful having the National Trust property there as my benchmark. But yes, my species list now is making them wanting to talk to me a lot more.
Yeah.
Right. Well, nobody else has any questions for Sally Ann. I'd like to say a very big thank you to her for such an entertaining and fascinating. So thank you very much, Sally Ann. Thank you.
I squeezed in an awful lot there in about, I don't know how long it was, about an hour, I think it was. Yeah. Yeah, I did literally throw an awful lot of information straight at you. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Our very own rewilding in Lambourn.
Right. Well, thank you all very much. Next month, 24th of November, Nicola Cornick will be talking to us. She is, some of you may be familiar with her historical fiction, historical romance novels, but she's also a proper historian. She does her proper research. She has a new book out in the middle of November, and she's speaking to us the week later. So I'm not quite sure yet what her topic will be, but it could well be the new book, or it might well be about some of the research that she's done. So we'll wait and see then, but it will be advertised. So hopefully see some of you next month. Okay, well, thank you all very much.